Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of the RTN season. Road to National seasons across the world wrapped up this past weekend, and that means that constructed level play, classic constructed specifically, is moving into the big boys. It's all about the Pro Tours and the callings again, and the Nationals, and then Worlds later this year, which is incredibly exciting. But before all of that, or I guess in the meantime, we're moving into another skirmish season, and this skirmish season brings us back to the Blitz format. So along with the coverage and the deck guides and the deck text that I'm going to be making for a variety of classic constructed decks that we have seen perform well and are continuing to perform well in major tournaments, I'm also going to do some stuff with Blitz, because Blitz is a really fast, fun format that is perhaps more wide open than ever now that Crown of Seeds is kind of gone out of the way and Oldham is maybe a little bit pushed down. And when this happens, when a new set of cards come out, it's always important to look back at the heroes that maybe just quite weren't there and revisit their decks and see if they got any new tools. And so that's what we're doing today. We are putting together our BENJI the Piercing Wind deck list. This is a guide for BENJI the Piercing Wind with some new spicy additions that I think make the deck a little bit more interesting and perhaps a little bit more varied and have a little bit more flexibility into the field, whereas BENJI might not have had in the prior meta. So BENJI the Piercing Wind, if you don't know, is a young ninja hero that has 4 intellect, 17 health, and says attack action cards you control with 2 or less attack can't be defended with cards from hand. So the only way you attack, so you defend these attacks as the opponent, is you react from the arsenal with a defense reaction, or you use your equipment to block. Otherwise, you don't get to declare blocks from hand, and you just take whatever damage BENJI throws at you. If it is 2 or less coming from an attack action card, you just can't block it from hand. So that's very good. That's very powerful. It basically allows us to push unblockable damage with BENJI, but we also have this effect. Once per turn effect, when an attack action card you control hits, your next attack this turn gains +1. So in a way, if we push one of these quote-unquote unblockable attacks with our attack actions and it connects, it can give our next thing +1, kind of like what Ira does. So Ira has the second chain link you push each turn, gets +1. In a way, BENJI can do the same thing, just letting it fall at any point in the turn, but it has to come after your first attack hits each turn, basically. What that means is we can play this sort of like Ira, and we can play it sort of like BENJI in the past. This has always been the case, but we leaned into it a little bit with this go-around of the deck, and I'm still kind of parsing out a couple of cards of which I like and which I don't, but I'll talk through those as we go. And of course, if you like this video guide and you want a written guide, check out the Patreon. I put it up on the Patreon. There's a full written guide as to how you just kind of want to go about it and what cards I want to try swapping out and give it a shot. Try making like little changes here and there, and I will update the deck guide as I go. But if you want to support the channel and get access to literally every deck guide I've put out and continue to put out month after month, week after week, feel free to head on over to the Patreon. All right, so we're playing 2 harmonized Kodachis. We are not technically in this little package that I've put together for the video. We're not technically playing any Zephyr Needles, but it might be interesting to try the Zephyr Needles because Zephyr Needle is actually pretty decent if there's not a ton of defense reactions floating around, and if there's a bunch of aggro, there may not be defense reactions floating around, so you may get some value. But nevertheless, we can just run out these harmonized Kodachis and feel super comfortable with them. They push 1. We have a lot of zeros that pitch for a variety of colors, and oftentimes yellow and blue. So it's just a natural fit for 2 harmonized Kodachis, pushing 1 damage. And it is something that we are going to talk about. We're going to lean a little bit more into making sure we push Kodachis so that we can activate perhaps the other mask. But first of all, we are still running Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. This card can fetch you your OTK card, which we will talk about here in a moment. It is just really good like that. It can fetch you the card that you need to like push a bunch of damage and do crazy things. That being said, we might also want to run Mask of Momentum. And why would we want to run Mask of the Momentum? Well, if we run Mask of Momentum, and this has always been true, we can use our resources to, technically the unblockable nature of BENJI, to possibly push more mask triggers if our opponent is wanting to be greedy and hold on to hands, or if they're wanting to, you know, just like try to block advantageously or keep their equipment alive, we can possibly push mask triggers by using our Kodachis and using our unblockable attacks strategically and dig naturally for our Spring Tidings and our other cards like that, rather than just trying to tutor them out once. So this is a pivot that I've considered, and I'm trying to work through and parse through to see how I feel about it. But this is something that I'm kind of pivoting to, we'll just put it that way, that I want to try using Mask of Momentum more than we did in the previous meta, where it was literally all about just trying to tutor out the combo and winning the game off the combo. And then if you got stopped on the combo, you just lost. So it would be nice to not just lose outright. Then we have Vest of the First Fist, which is just honestly just good, right? You use this on those combo turns to get those resources, to push that damage, and to just go super wide. I think it's still worth just running this. You could possibly consider the new chest piece that came out in the Classic Battles set. You can consider that one, which might be a nice little swap in for this, which is sort of the same thing, but this one gets you 2 resources, but it does require you to hit. And then another fun little piece is the Tiger Stripe Shuko, which we did get for BENJI in this go-around, and I do think it actually is worth running out there. Yes, it can technically push your attack that it falls on. It could push it over the barrier, allowing your opponent to block. Because remember, if your opponent looks at a 2 attack, they can't block it on an attack action card. But if it's a 3 attack, if it goes up to the 3 attack, they can. So Tiger Stripe Shuko may have some anti-synergy, but we have enough 1s in the deck that this just falls and pushes 1 little extra damage, and still usually makes that 1 attack become a 2 attack and still be unblockable. So I think that is a solid little addition. I think it's persistent now versus using like breaking scales, which is nice. And it also just comes with 2 block, so you can also use it for that. And then of course we have Breeze Rider boots. I think these Breeze Rider boots are, in this current build, the go-to boots. They also allow you to block. They allow you to play a little bit more defensively if you want to by blocking. And don't forget that we do start out with some of the least amount of health in the game at 17. And in doing so, having equipment that block and play more defensively allow you to flex a little bit. So we do run these, and namely because we want to give combo cards go again. But I've cut down on the number of combo cards, and so I'm considering, as I play this deck, I'm considering the possibility of swapping to like Snapdragon Scalers for a very key turn. But let's talk through the mainstays of the deck that are still there from previous seasons, and then we'll talk about some new stuff and some changes that I've made to this current list overall. So Spring Tidings is that card. It's the BENJI specialization. It's the Everfest specialization Majestic that we got that says when Spring Tidings hits, it draws a card for each other attack action card with 2 or less base attack you control in the combat chain, which is pretty nuts. And again, this is unblockable, so if your opponent doesn't use equipment or have a defense reaction, you get the trigger. And that is very important for your opponent to understand how to play around this. If they don't understand how to play around this, you win the game. Because you go like attack action, Spring Tidings, draw 2 cards, attack action, you drew into another Spring Tidings, draw 5 cards, and you just push more damage than they can deal with. That being said, we don't have to use this as the way we win the game. If we want to use other cards and other damage sources to push damage, we can do that in this deck after we made a couple of changes. That being said, we do still include Ride the Tailwind yellows. This is like the linchpin card for the deck if you build the deck towards the combo side of things. Ride the Tailwinds allows, if this hits, it allows something to gain go again that wouldn't normally have it, and this has base go again. I'm very much considering running the reds, even though they can be blocked, just on the off chance that if our opponent lets it hit, our turn can go wider, and it's still a go again. That being said, I don't think I'm there yet. I think I'm just sticking with the yellows and the blues. Head Jab is a 2 with go again, which is pretty solid. because we just want things like, for example, Phi right now is very big into combo starters. You can consider all of the cards that we just talked about, minus the first two, to be combo starters. Same thing with 100 Wins. It's sort of just a combo starter. It has Go Again. It pushes unblockable damage that your opponent can't interact with in a very efficient way. So we run the yellows and the blues. And if you're looking at this base, it's going to be a lot of yellows and blues, namely because those are the unblockable breakpoints of 2 and 1. But it also means that we can now pitch these away, just like we could before, and attack with Kodachis and string out some nice little combo lines and try to push mask triggers. So we're playing both games, and this is something we did in the previous deck, but I think people shied away from that to some degree, trying to land the combo only. And I know I can speak, early on I could speak to my own experience trying that. I think you need to weave in those Kodachis. Now, cards that we have added that are very interesting. Vipox is new to Uprising from Uprising. It costs 0, it attacks for 1, and it says when it hits a hero, they lose life equal to the number of cards in their hand. Now, this does not have Go Again, but if we play Ride the Tailwind beforehand, Ride the Tailwind hits, it will give Go Again to Vipox, which again, by the way, if Vipox receives the buff from BENJI, because like Ride the Tailwind hit, well, Vipox will go to 2 and still be unblockable. So this becomes a card now that opponents have to very much respect, because if they don't respect this card and you go something like Ride the Tailwinds, unblockable, into Vipox, unblockable, and deals them 4 damage after it hits for 2, this is another way to just win the game. It's like just straight up close out and win the game. And so Vipox is a huge part, so we run 2 of those. Double Strikes. Now, there's been some talk as to whether or not Double Strike is actually worth it because of the text and the way the card works. So Double Strike is basically like 2 Kodachis, but they are 2 attack actions when you're playing them. But it says when Double Strike's Chain Link resolves, you banish it. So you actually take the attack action card off the Chain Link, and then if you play it again, it comes back to the Chain Link. Now, that link still stays available, but it doesn't count towards the draw off of Spring Tidings, because Spring Tidings is specifically drawing a card for each other attack action card on the combat chain. So even though there is a link that may or may not have hit on the first Double Strike, it doesn't count it. So that means that the question becomes, do we actually play this? And in my opinion, I still think it's totally worth it to play, because you're still getting an unblockable for 1 that can trigger your BENJI effect, and then you can come in again with an unblockable for 1. Yes, it'll only count 1 time. If it counted twice, this would be nuts. It'd be disgusting. It'd be painful for everybody not named BENJI. But even just counting itself once and not twice, still really good. I still think is a fine card to play, fine card to run. I am now including Flying Kicks. I am taking a page out of all of the other ninjas and technically taking a page out of Ira, and I'm just playing Flying Kick. Why? Well, we have a lot of yellows and blues. We can always, on an off turn, have this in arsenal, keep a blue in hand, go Kodachi, Flying Kick, Kodachi, Flying Kick, depending on if you have a yellow or a blue, right? It's super good. Technically, we would have to go Kodachi, Flying Kick for the blue, and then we would need an extra card to pitch to Flying Kick after if we wanted to go Kodachi, Flying Kick. But either way, it doesn't really matter. The fact that we can push 7 on our opponent, and possibly even more if we line up like an unblockable attack before this, pushing like 8 or something like that, means this card's just valuable. And yes, this is a card that they can actually block from hand, but if you've played enough BENJI, you know that sometimes you actually want them to commit a card or 2 onto the link so that you can take pressure off of yourself and then play for the late game unblockable stuff after the fact. So with that in mind, this is a fantastic card to see in the mid game to push life totals lower and actually play for unblockable damage. So we run 2. And then finally, I actually cut down my number of Salt the Wounds down by 1, because I played enough games with BENJI to run into the problem where you run into like multiple Salt the Wounds, and this has no way of getting Go Again. If you're running Breeze Rider boots, this can't get Go Again from Breeze Rider boots. The only way you give this Go Again is if you're running Snapdragon Scalers, and this would be the only thing that you really end up snapping probably pretty consistently, and it's basically just a fail-safe if you draw 2. So I cut this down to 1. It's still a really good card, especially in this deck where you can really kind of draw cards and go wide off of Spring Tidings. But if we are looking not so much to like just immediately go for the OTK combo, Salt the Wound is a little bit of just kind of clunkiness. So we cut it down to 1. That allows us to pump in a couple of different cards, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Now, even bigger than that is a fantastic instant that we just play on Kodachis, or we play on our 1s, and we go draw cards, and we opt to. I'm running the yellows. I used to have the reds in here that opted 3. I think the yellows are just fine. Plus, in a pinch, you can have this in your hand after you blocked with your entire hand, because this doesn't block. Pitch it to a couple of Kodachis. So I run 2 of those. Run 2 Red Razor Reflexes. I kind of want to run the yellows. In fact, that is one of the cards that I'm considering swapping out, or swapping in for a couple of other cards swapping out. But I like the reds here. The yellows help you smooth out the go again problem. But I like reds. Obviously, you're just going to run the reds because you do. And then Ancestral Empowerment. You run the Ancestral Empowerment. It digs you further into the deck. Draws you a card. Just about everything that you run is a ninja attack action card, except now, of course, Vipoxes. So you'll be able to draw cards off of this, play it on top of those ninja attack action cards, and just push extra damage. All right, and finally we come to a couple of changes that I've made from previous decks in general. I am now running blue Soul Bead Strikes. Yes, our opponent could stop this with an equipment block from, or an arsenal, like defense reaction, something like that. I don't really care. If they do that, that's great, because I'm getting a finite resource out of their hands, and I'm setting up for possibly later turn. But it does also provide us the upside if we, just randomly draw into like the overall like Soul Bead line. So we're running 2 Crane Dances. And these don't have go again, so again, this is why you run Breeze Rider Boots. You snap the Breeze Rider Boots when one of these hits, and you can gain go again. To all combo cards. So we run 2 of the yellows, and we run 2 of the blues. We also run the Find Center combo finisher for this line, and we run exactly 2 of these, but we've included Heron's Flight. And you may look at this and you go, why are you including Heron's Flight? Well, currently the meta, from what I'm surmising, is going to be oftentimes just like, well, they're going to have exactly this breakdown of either non-attacks, like all their decks non-attacks, or all their decks attacks. For example, if you're playing into Dorinthia, all their decks non-attacks. If you're playing into Phi, all their decks attacks, right? So this breakdown basically makes this unblockable. But even if they do have counterplay, and including but not limited to things like Oasis Respite, it's still just a nice little finisher that costs nothing, right? If you get this to line up, it still pushes 5, and yeah, that maybe they can deal with it a little bit, but it doesn't really matter that much. So for me, this feels fine. Whether or not that sticks, that's something that I will do continued testing with, and I'll update the text guide as I go. Rushing River is interesting. I'm actually cutting down one of the blues out of Rushing River because I don't really want to lean heavy into this line. In fact, I straight out took Torrent of Tempo out. Really, this is just payoff for Breaktide, and Breaktide in and of itself can just be played at the end of a long combat chain for its own value of being unblockable. But outside of that, I'm not really looking to line into like a Torrent of Tempo. Or not Torrent of Tempo, what am I saying? What's the Flood of Force? That's the one. So I took out Flood of Force completely because I just don't like the way that card feels. Even if you're just throwing it out there on a combo turn, it's like 1. It's like I can do that with a lot of other things as well. I would rather run like, I don't know, 2 blue Soul Bead Strikes for 2 that could already have go again if your opponent doesn't commit something. So I'm lowering the number of Rushing River and Breaktide, basically just like combos in the deck. So that basically rounds out what the deck is doing now and how the deck is going to try and go about its business. So let's go ahead and jump into a sample turn or 2. All right, so I've shuffled up here. I've done a random shuffle. I'll just do a random draw, and we'll just play out a couple of sample turns. In this scenario, we're playing into a matchup that's a little bit more even-keeled, maybe into like a Kasai, for example, that can push a lot of damage, but isn't trying to like basically just kill you on turn 1. If you're looking for, like what would you do into like the super aggro Phis of the world that can like literally just try to push a billion damage on you and never block in the world, you probably play the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. But the fact that you're running now equipment that have block, and you could always blade break block with the the mask, is very helpful. Nevertheless, let's just assume that we're playing into like a more mid-rangey deck, and just draw up and see what we draw into. Here we draw into a Soul Bead Strike, a Razor Reflex, a Break Tide, and an Ancestral Empowerment. So we do have resources if we want to pitch the Soul Bead Strike, and then we can follow this up with a variety of things that we can do. So if we Kodachi for 1, floating 2 resources, we're presenting 1 damage, and then we can do something like Break Tide, which costs nothing and it only pushes 2, but again, our opponent can't interact with it, and we have the capability of giving it go again with the Razor Reflex. But before we do that, we can give it +1, which does mean that they can react, but it does allow us to draw a card and possibly dig further into our deck to try and find combo pieces. Then we can give it go again by doing this here, and again, this does make it interactable if they have defense reactions, or if they want to like preemptively, if they like blocked with their whole equipment suite. The only thing they can really do is defense react now from hand that they couldn't do before. But all of a sudden we went from pushing 2 damage to pushing 3 damage to pushing 6 damage all of a sudden, and it's not really interactable anymore. And then we can follow this up because that's the first attack action card to hit. We can send a Kodachi for 2. If our opponent didn't commit to blocking here, or they didn't have the ability or choose not to block here, then this Kodachi for 2 is like a must block. Otherwise we get a mask draw, and this Kodachi does have go again. We paid for 1 for this, and then we paid 1 for that, so we have no resources floating. We probably don't want to play the Ride to Tailwind, but our opponent doesn't know that. We can simply Arsenal and move on. So there we pushed 1 interactable damage that they could have dealt with, 2 after the fact that they could have dealt with, but then this awkward moment where they can't really deal with this with blocks, and then they have to rely on defense reactions to sort of save them, either in the arsenal or in hand. And if defense reactions aren't that popular in the current meta, or in the upcoming meta, then we may have a nice little ticket here for BENJI. That being said, if they are, or if like a ton of equipment is possible, then we might have a problem. Now, drawing into this hand, we have 2 Heron's Flights. We do have 100 Winds. We have a Crane Dance. So we can do some interesting stuff with this, because don't forget we arsenaled a Ride the Tailwind. We can start by Kodachi, and then we can follow that up with Ride the Tailwind. That is, again, uninteractable. And if they don't commit to blocking this, which they probably won't, then Crane Dance gets go again. Now this does end up dealing 3, because if this one connects, that one would deal 3. But we can avoid that by sending the Harmonized Kodachi for 2. So then we've pushed 1. We've pushed 1. That connects, most likely. We push 2. This Crane Dance actually receives the go again from the Ride the Tailwind, because this just gives it to the next attack action card you play. So this pushes 2. But it has guaranteed go again. It doesn't have the effect, but it does mean that we can play a Heron's Flight for 5. Okay, and then we can arsenal this one as well, which is pretty sweet. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that Tiger Stripes Shuko has triggered on this entire engagement, if you will, because it says that the second attack action card with 2 or less gains +1. So this one would be interactable and technically would push to 3, but it doesn't even matter, because you don't care. What you're doing is you're setting up Heron's Flight, and depending on what deck you're playing into, for example Kasai, you can basically just say, well, Heron's Flight gains +2, and you choose attack or non-attack. Heron's Flight can only be defended. So you can say, oh, you can only defend Heron's Flight with attack action cards. And if this is Kasai, they're going to have like 1 in their deck, maybe, if they're playing Nourishing Emptiness. So all of a sudden, that's 5 unblockable. And depending on how they blocked this combat chain, if they didn't block there and they didn't block there, you might have a mask trigger, right? So this is the interesting thing that you play into with mask. And this is all off of the assumption that we haven't drawn, which we haven't drawn into any of our like super gas kind of cards. So this is my current working of BENJI in this new Blitz metagame. This is where I'm at with it. I'm trying things like Heron's Flight again. I'm trying to see if Break Tide still has the value that we want it to have overall, and if we want to lean in heavy into the things that can kind of combo off, and whether or not we want to take out more combo pieces and the Breeze Riders in favor of things that just have natural go again, or pay off cards like the Flying Kick that I talked about earlier. Let me know what you think about this deck in the wider meta at large going into this new skirmish season. What do you think BENJI's going to be able to do? Do you think it's going to be just this dark horse deck off to the side that it kind of was for the last skirmish season, or do you think it has some new capabilities at its disposal? If you enjoyed this, always feel free to make the number go to the number. We're closing in on the big celebration number as well, so that's exciting. Feel free to join in on the giveaway there, because we're going to hit 10K very soon, and I want to celebrate along with you. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.